Hey you guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today we are talking fall jerkbait fishing. One of my absolute favorite ways to catch a bass. I hope you guys are ready for a deep dive today. We are talking jerkbaits. Fall is prime time to throw the jerkbait. This is the start of the bite, and it will go from now all the way through the winter and back into spring. Now you can do it year round, but that's that prime season. We're right on the front end of that, and I want to help you guys be prepared to go out there and slay with a jerkbait this year. So I've got a pile of jerkbaits here to talk to you about, but with that said, I'm going to do everything in my power to simplify it for you. Not for me, but for you. So to kick us off, these are my jerkbait boxes. I kid you not. This is a lifetime accumulation of jerkbaits. Half of them are still made, half of them aren't. My goal today is for you to never have to do this. This took decades of tackle sickness and experimentation to end up this way. It didn't happen overnight. But I don't want you guys to go here. It's so much money in jerkbaits, and most of them I will never, ever throw again. But I had to buy them to find out if they were any good, if they did something special, if there was a niche place for them, because something like TacticalBassin didn't used to exist. The only way to find out was to spend the money, buy them, go out there, catch fish or not catch fish, and then stick that one back in the box. As a result, I've gained a lot of knowledge about jerkbaits over the years, and today I'm going to pour it out for you. At the end of this, I'm hoping that for you, the answers will be very clear. And if you want to get serious about jerkbait fishing, you will only need a handful of baits and you'll be set, and you'll never go through this like I did. So in the fall, I've really got 3 main baits, but today in total, we're going to talk about maybe 8 or 10, okay? Some of them are very niche categories. You're not going to need all that stuff. But if one of them applies to you, if you're hearing me talk about a very specific bait for a specific purpose, and that jives with something that you face out on the water, well, then that's a good fit for you. But to kick it off, we're going to keep it simple. Okay, to start, I'm talking about 3 baits that I could take and do virtually everything that I need to do, at least 95% of what I need to do, and just 1 rod. That's all it's gonna take. Now, this, actually I'm gonna start right here, okay? I say 1 rod, I've got 2 of them sitting here, but they're the exact same thing. Did I mention I'm fanatical about my jerkbaits? So, it is not a secret to any of you who have been around us for a while that the X-Pride 610 medium is, in my opinion, the baddest jerkbait rod that you can get at any price, just across the board. It's my favorite jerkbait rod. There are some other great rods on the market, and there are some at different price points. So like every video, in the video description, I'll be linking the baits, specific colors that we use for different things. I'll also be linking my gear, but the one thing I wanted to tell you right on the front end of this video, in case you've been dying to get one, because I know a lot of you have, the X-Pride 610 medium, not the glass, the regular, is finally back in stock. You can actually get this rod. I pair it with an Aldebaran. The HG, so high gear, which means 7-to-1 in Shimano speak, that's what the HG is. XG is 8-to-1, HG 7-to-1. If it doesn't say anything, that's a 6-to-1. So an Aldebaran in the HG. However, if you want to save a little bit of coin on the whole thing, the Corrado 70 is also a phenomenal jerkbait reel. Cece was fishing with it all year this year and just absolutely loved it, and that'll save you some money too. So my exact setup is a 610 medium X-Pride, Aldebaran, and then either 10 or 12 pound fluorocarbon. That's my just bread and butter, my go-to. Now, I throw some other rods. Sometimes I throw it on braid to leader. There are times where I adapt, but that is at least 95% of the time what I'm using. I just went down that tangent right on the front end because I'm so excited that you guys can actually get the rod, because I know so many of you have been beating your head on the wall for what, a year and a half, trying to get one and couldn't get one. So with that said, I'm gonna jump into these baits, but before I do, let's talk about the actual, what is jerkbaiting? I don't even know how far we are into this video. I'm just excited. So I don't even know if we've even gone there yet. So a jerkbait, you've got two versions. You've got a soft jerkbait and a hard jerkbait. Soft jerkbait, the main bait that I think of as a fluke. We're not going to go down that road at all today. Today we're talking hard baits, okay? Tim just did a phenomenal fluke video talking about multiple ways to rig them, how to adapt them from ultra shallow like a topwater all the way down into deep water. In fact, I'll link that before I even link a bait. That'll be the first thing I link in the description, so that if you missed that video on soft jerkbaits, you can go back and catch it. But today we'll focus entirely on hard baits. What makes a jerkbait so special, and the reason why I geek out on it so bad, is it is one of only a handful of baits that is capable of triggering a core feed response from a bass. So what that means is there's plenty of things that you can go out and fish with, and a bass will see them. I just watched a blow up out here. A bass will see them, decide they want to eat it, and attack that thing. But there are a few select baits that will take a bass that is lethargic, it doesn't want to eat, and it will, based on reaction, trigger a feed response, and the fish will lash out. And they'll attack whether or not they were initially going to eat. It's an actual response that they can't necessarily control. So, we got some waves coming in here. Hopefully the sound's not too loud for you. So with that in mind, the jerkbait, speed cranking is the other major one for me. There are a handful of others, but these are some key baits that when you learn to use them effectively, you can catch fish when nothing else will catch fish, because you're not reliant on the fish to want to eat the bait. You can just literally force feed them. You present something that they can't say no to, and they attack it. It's also an incredible bait around feeding fish. So if bass are schooling, if they're aggressive, if they're working a bait ball, it's an incredible bait for firing up a school, getting them fired up and attacking those bait fish, getting them to react. And you can get entire schools of fish fired up with it. And then you have an opportunity to catch giants. A jerkbait is a bait that will catch little tiny bass, and it will catch the biggest bass of your life. My largest jerkbait fish is just short of 13 pounds, and it was caught out of a school of bass. So it was not the first fish that I caught in that school, but I triggered some fish into feeding and was catching these 1 and 2 and 3 pounders, and then this 12+ pounder that would have never eaten a little jerkbait on its own. You know, she was just sitting out on a shoreline. Is she interested in a little tiny bait? Probably not most of the time anyway. But she got caught up in all this flurry with these small fish, and next thing you know, this giant bass wolfed my jerkbait, and she ate it on 8-pound straight fluorocarbon. You want to talk about a battle. It was a battle. So it's easy to see why I get so excited about this. Now, the actual method of fishing a jerkbait involves snapping the rod, ripping the rod towards the water to cause the bait to dart, okay? And it's a combination of darts and pauses, and there's nothing else. You never want to, I say never, somebody in the comments will say, I reel jerkbaits and fish eat them. And that's true, I've caught fish doing that. But that is not the purpose of the jerkbait, and that will not trigger a feed response. If you're interested in triggering a feed response in a bass, the way to fish a jerkbait is to go from dead stopped to hard jerks to dead stopped, and it will sit there. Jerk again, and it will sit there. Now, with that in mind, comes some of the more technical aspects that we will get into. At first, we're going to keep this really simple. And mind you, some jerkbaits are really expensive. Some are super affordable. So I've got options for you today. Don't feel like you need to be overwhelmed with this thing. I'll give you a phenomenal budget rod and reel, a great combo that can do it on a budget, baits that can do it on a budget. But I want you to keep in mind that as we go through fall and the water gets colder and the fish get more lethargic, at first we're super aggressive. Later on, we start slowing that process down, okay? When we get into the heart of winter, we're not there yet, but today I want to teach you all of it. When we get into the heart of winter, that bait might sit here 10 or 15 seconds before you make the next move, okay? Now, some people go even longer than that, but I don't have the ability to just sit there and wait for 45 seconds before I twitch it one more time. But the longer the bait has to sit, the more important it becomes that the bait is refined, that the bait is perfect, that it will hover in the water. Because if you stop and it heads for the surface, or you stop and it heads for the bottom, it's not going to do what you want. So early fall, right now, you're good to go with the vast majority of jerkbaits. Now, there are still some that are total standouts, and we'll talk about that. But you can do it with almost any. The colder the water gets, you're going to need to get much more specific if you want to keep that bite going, or you need to get really good at tuning them. Get some suspend dots, suspend strips, and play with your baits to get them to hover in the water. Now, to kick this off, this is a Jackal re-range, okay? In the fall, specifically, early fall, anywhere except ultra clear water smallmouth, this is my favorite jerkbait. Ultra clear water smallmouth, it's a Vision 110, okay? Now, this will become my favorite everywhere as the water cools down. But early in the fall, the Jackal re-range is just unbelievable at getting reactions from these fish. So this bait, if you look at it, and some of this we've talked about before, some of it we haven't. But I want you to hang with me because we're going to cover a lot of stuff that we haven't before. So this bait is narrower in the bottom than the top, okay? The Jackal re-range comes in a shallow and a deep. See the bill size? See the difference? You don't necessarily need to own both, okay? I'm not trying to convince you that you need boxes and boxes of these things like I do. I wish I hadn't had to buy all of those to learn this stuff. I really do. But I want you to keep this in mind, because if you're on a lake where your fish are corralling bait fish into pockets, which is what's happening back here. I've seen several more blow-ups that I haven't pointed out. Whew, lots of blow-ups, but they're really shallow because I'm here on Chickamauga. They're pushed up against a grass line. That's a tough spot for a jerkbait. That's where you would go to a soft jerkbait. But on your lake, when the bass start corralling bait fish, because that's the easiest time to do this by far this time of year, if they corral them into really shallow pockets, throw a re-range. If they corral them into steeper coves, if your lake has steeper coves, there's deeper water, go with the MR, the medium runner. You'll be way better off. You don't necessarily need both. It's just a depth thing. How deep do you need the bait to go, and make your best selection. But with the re-range, what makes this bait so special, I mentioned that shape, narrow in the bottom, wide in the back. These baits, when you hit them, when you snap that rod, have an incredible amount of roll. They don't dart like this. That's not what they do. They do these like crazy roll, flip over, super aggressive moves. And as a result, they just shine light out through the water. I've watched a lot of underwater footage of jerkbaits that Tim and I have shot over the years, a ton. We've probably shot 20 or 30 different jerkbaits underwater over the last 7 or 8 years. Nothing throws light like a re-range. Now the reason that that's important is because if your fish are corralling bait, if they're pushing shad, if they're pushing any bait fish, the way you get those fish to react is to stand out from the crowd, right? You never want to go to a giant ball of bait and throw a 2.8 Kitech on an exposed head. You're far better off throwing it with an underspin blade under it, because the flash makes that one bait stand out from the thousands. Same deal here. When you work a jerkbait through a ball of bait, the bait literally gets out of the way and leaves the jerkbait hovering there all by its lonesome. When you twitch it again and it throws that light out, those fish that are hunting from below will see that and they will come for it. The bites are insane. When they're tagging that thing around schooling fish, they are brutal how they hit it. It is vicious. So it's something you need to experience if you haven't. Now, you don't necessarily need fish targeting bait fish. Today, well, you can't see it because we got your face the wrong way. But I've got a chop out here on the water, a ripple. In the fall, a ripple goes a long way for a jerkbait bite. If the water is perfectly slick, it's not that you can't catch them, but you definitely are in for a longer game. You're not going to get as many bites. If you get a ripple on the water and you start fishing those jerkbaits, I'm not even sure why. I feel like it has to do with that light refraction, that all the baits start throwing more light than they would when it's dead slick, and you'll just do better. So this time of year, schooling bait fish is your #1 opportunity. A jerkbait will just smash around that. But 2, if you get a chop on the water, go to a wind-blown bank and just go down the shoreline throwing that jerkbait. On a new lake, you can find fish really quickly doing that because you can cover a lot of water. Now, when you're fishing this bait, you don't need a lot of long pauses. Okay, just twitch, 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 twitch. I mix up either 1, 2, or 3 twitches, and it's generally at random. I just break up the cadence so it's not doing the same thing all the time. But not really long pauses, okay? Those fish right now are aggressive and they will hunt that bait down and they will smash it. As the water cools, the pauses get longer. So one other thing I want to mention about how you work these baits is that you don't want to hit them too hard. What I mean by that is when you're working the rod, when you're actually snapping that rod, you don't want to hit the bait super, super hard. Now, there are times that you do, and there is also an exception to that rule, that Rapala rip stop right there. We'll get to that. But in general, I see people ripping harder than I do. You don't have to be really, really aggressive with the baits. I'm more aggressive with a re-range than any of the others except that rip stop. Okay, but you don't have to get crazy with it. Just work that bait. You don't have to just full body, just tear into that thing. Now, sometimes you can around bait fish with a re-range or a rip stop. You can get pretty mean to that bait and they will eat it. But as that water starts to cool down, or if you're a smallmouth guy, when I go smallmouth fishing, I am just locked on a Vision 110. That's my bait. That's the matte shad color. That's one of my probably 3 or 4 absolute favorite colors right there. But the Vision 110 is a very refined bait. I don't fiddle with them a whole lot because if you fiddle with them, if you start changing things out, you mess up the balance. This is the bait I was talking about, where as that water gets colder, you need a bait that will just sit there. And the Vision 110, amongst all of the jerkbaits, is by far the most refined. It's the bait that day in and day out, you can fish the slowest and it will just hold its place suspended in the water column. Now, not everybody likes the hooks that come on a Vision 110, or you wear those hooks out. You need to change them. That is probably the most technical thing that people complain about. In a video last year, we solved that. I actually got a gram scale out and weighed hooks to the gram and came up, actually it was fractions of a gram, and came up with the perfect hook replacements for a 110 and for the junior size, okay? I'm not going to go into that today. That was a whole nother animal, but it was just like looking at this pile of boxes. It was another look into my jerkbait insanity. I am willing to buy a gram scale and weigh hooks just to catch more fish on a jerkbait. It's a sickness. But with that said, again, in the video description, if there's room, sometimes we run out of room, but if there's room, I will link you the exact, because the weight matters across the board. So it's the split rings and the hooks to get those baits perfectly balanced, but with stronger hooks. Here's one that I've updated. See, those are not stock hooks, and actually the middle one's broken because I butchered some smallmouth on this not too long ago. And at the very end of the day, I broke a hook point off, and I was like, well, I guess it's time to call it a day. But you can see stock hooks, modified hooks. But these two baits, all these items have been weighed, and they both balance perfectly in the water column. So we do know how to do it. So, again, the poor beginner is now going, what are you, scales? What are you talking about? For the beginner, I've got some budget stuff coming, and I'm gonna make it so much easier for you. Don't even worry about it. All you need to know is that if you get a good jerkbait rod, and trust me, a good jerkbait rod is critical. You have to have a good jerkbait rod if you're going to do this a lot. It matters. It's very hard to find a rod that has a stiff enough tip section to work a jerkbait properly, to get those hard motions without slow pulling the bait. But then when you hook the fish, is now soft enough in the rest of the rod to load up and keep those little tiny treble hooks in place in a big fish's mouth. That is a near impossible task for a rod builder, right? Those are opposites. But there are a handful of rods that do a really good job of it. So that's why that's so critical. Now, if you're just gonna throw a jerkbait once in a while, just go for it. But if you're gonna take it seriously, get a jerkbait rod. This is one of those handful of techniques where it really pays to have the right rod for the job. So, for the poor beginner, hang in a little bit longer. I promise I will simplify it for you. But for everybody else, I told you I start out with 3 jerkbaits. Going into fall, re-range. You pick which depth, okay? It's really only gonna be, well, no, I guess it is 3. It's 3. The other 2 are going to be the 110 and the 110 Junior. And then again, you've got a standard 110, look at the bills, and a 110 plus 1. Same deal with the Junior. Standard 110 Junior, 110 Junior plus 1, deeper diver. Okay, but you don't have to be complicated about it. So here's what you're going to do. I want you to consider the size of bait fish that you typically see in your lake. Hopefully you see some, so you have a place to start. If you have no idea, just get the Vision 110, call it a day. But if you know that you have smaller bait fish in the fall, then don't worry about this, just throw the Junior. And then same game. Are they shallow or are they deeper? Are they shallow or are they deeper? You don't have to buy a ton of baits. You just need to think through which one is right for you and just commit to that, okay? These are really good baits. If you choose the right bait in the right category, you're gonna be fine. Get a re-range, throw it around bait fish, you're gonna get them. Get a Vision 110, throw it on a little bit lighter line, slow work that bait when they don't want to eat other things, you're gonna get them. It works. So you can just plain fish with confidence. Now, color is a whole nother animal, and we are going to open up that Pandora's box here in a little bit. We actually covered some of that in 2 recent jerkbait videos where I was on the water. One with Cece and one when I was out with Tim. And both times playing with color became a major factor. We went from, with Cece, you guys probably saw that video, we went from fish that were slapping at baits and coming off, like almost all of them coming off, to fish that were just clobbering it, just getting a face full, and all of them were coming in the boat after that. And it was just color. But again, we will get back to that. For now, we're going to continue with baits. So in the video description, I'm going to link baits, all the baits, rods, and then I'll give you, when it comes to color, I'll give you my key colors, and then I'll also give you what we're going to call oddball colors, but I'll have explained that before you need it, okay? So you've got the re-range, the 110, and the 110 plus 1 to get deeper, and then sizes from there. There's also a 110 plus 2. There are a lot of other options, but I don't want to make it that complicated for you. Those key baits will do everything you need to do. The only guy who's going to throw a plus 2 over a plus 1 is a guy who fishes deep all the time. You're on a clear water fishery, you know your fish are deeper. Well, in that case, you don't need me sitting here telling you get the deepest one. You already know that. But for the average guy, that's not you. You're here. You're one of those two baits. It's that simple. Now, that said, we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk about a couple of other things. I've got 4 more baits for you, okay? If you want, let's go here first, because this is kind of a cool one. It's a very different bait. This is a Demiki. It's only got 2 hooks. It's got a tiny little lip on it. You see that guy there? Tiny little lip. This bait I only use for one thing. That's it. This is a niche bait, okay? We have now finished talking about bread and butter baits. We're shifting gears here a little bit. This guy, the Slim Jack, will fish ultra shallow. So if your fish are right up on the bank, if they're pushing bait dirt shallow, and they will eat a jerk bait, but you're constantly hitting bottom. Maybe you're breaking lips off of baits, you're so shallow. Especially when the water gets colder. Some of these baits get brittle, you start snapping the lips off on them. So frustrating. That little guy will go shallower than all the rest. Now that said, this bait, it rises. It doesn't have perfect balance, and it actually doesn't rise like this, it rises like this. That's not my favorite. But what I do like is how shallow I can keep it. So when they're right up tight, they are working bait fish, and you wish you had a bait that would get even shallower, this is your bait. But fish it hard, fish it aggressive, not a lot of pausing, because if you pause, it'll start to lift out of there, and that's not what you want. So be really aggressive with that one. But again, I know I'm speaking to somebody. If you're that guy, if you wish you could get that jerkbait shallower, that one will go there. Let's go here, and then we'll go to the best budget option of them all. For the guy who doesn't want to pay for Vision 110s, the Rapalas are actually quite a bit cheaper, okay? And there's 2 options here. You've got the ripstop, and then you've got your shadow wraps. I wish you guys could see this Allison going by. You probably hear it. He is screaming. Oh, it's a whole line of them. Look at these guys. They're so far away, I don't know if you're gonna get to see them. That right there, that is the Tennessee River in a nutshell. Oh, there's a bunch of them going by. You could hear the motors. So out here, speed is part of the culture. Fast boats, particularly fast bass boats. Anyway, we're going down a tangent, but it was cool to just watch 6 of these guys rip by. The Tennessee River is in the heart of that speed culture, and guys run fast boats here like people run hot rods, classic cars, motorcycles, other places. It's just, it is in the culture. So all of a sudden, these just 100-mile-an-hour boats just come zipping by. It's incredible. So, we were talking Rapala. All right, gotta calm back down again. We got the ripstop and the shadow wrap. The shadow wrap, this is going to be a more traditional jerkbait, okay? More like the Vision, where it's got a great action to it, but it is a slight slow sinker, okay? One just blew up in the mat right here. So slight slow sinking. So when that water gets ultra cold, when it really starts to cool down and I need my bait to suspend, that's not my bait. But when the water's warmer, like it is now, early fall, that's a fantastic option. And you're talking, I think, like right around like high $9s, low $10, something like that. So you're saving some money, and you've got, I mean, it darts beautifully. And it's got a great nose down sit in the water, which we almost skipped over. All these baits sit differently in the water. Okay, a re-range, they sit flat. That's how it wants to sit in the water. So does a ripstop. We hadn't gotten to that yet, but a ripstop sits flat. This guy sits nose down. The Vision 110 Megabass, it sits nose down. And the 110 plus 1 is even more, and the 110 plus 2 is even more than that, okay? They all sit a little differently in the water, and there are times where that will matter. You might not realize at first that that's the trigger, but sometimes they want that dead flat bait. Sometimes they want that bait. I don't know why. That's when it pays to have a couple of options in the boat. Obviously, it's a rabbit hole, and you can go down it deep and have a lot of options to reach every little circumstance, which I do because I'm fanatical, but you don't necessarily have to. So let's get back to these two. It's got a nice nose down. It's got a beautiful, beautiful action to it. Not a ton of body roll by any means, just good hard turns. And then it'll do that slow drop. And they advertise that. They want you to know it does a slow drop. Now where that's a benefit to you is that you can count them down. Okay, so instead of having a bait that can only get 8 feet deep, you can throw it out there and just wait, and down she goes. And you can get it down to deeper fish. So there is a huge advantage to that at times. When it's not an advantage is when that water's really, really cold and you're trying to get that bait to hover. Now the ripstop, see, it's got this crazy little tail on it with a downward turned hook there. This bait, you hit this one hard. This is the bait where if you've got some aggression that you need to work out, this is your bait. This is the one bait that you take out and you are just gonna slam that thing. Hit it hard. It'll make these super sharp, super aggressive motions. And then as soon as it stops, that tail bites in and you'll watch the bait go, boom, whoop, and it'll like back up a little and get flat. And then you hit it again super hard, boom, and it'll cut. And then same thing, stand back up. Very different bait. If you need to work out some aggression, that's your bait. If you're on fish that are just losing their minds, they're just plowing through the surface, blowing up on bait fish, cutting dirt, and you're seeing them on your electronics, that is a great bait to trigger bites, much like the re-range. Just getting those fish to react. It's not for every day. It's not like a bread and butter bait for me. It's not one where I feel like I could take it to any circumstance and crack them. But when they're mad, and it makes a difference. Then last but not least is this little guy right here. This is a 13 fishing whippersnapper. Now, same deal, it's not perfectly balanced. This one rises, okay? So if you want it to suspend, you're gonna need to play with the weight on it or go to a little bit heavier hooks. That's another way to play with the weight. And you can get it to suspend, but out of the package, it'll have a little rise to it. But I will tell you what, this is by far the most budget-friendly of all of these baits. Comes in two sizes. This is the smaller one, and there's one that's a little bit bigger, like an inch longer. This bait looks awesome in the water. And it is, I mean, I would dare call it cheap. In the world of jerkbaits, it's cheap. And it looks really good in the water. It has a phenomenal dart. It actually throws a lot of light. It's balanced extremely well, except that it's got that little bit of rise. So you just need to know that. But these, I want to say they're like $6.99 or thereabouts. It's really an affordable jerkbait. So budget guy, somebody who doesn't know, even if you're not a budget guy, if you don't know jerkbaiting is for you, put it on one of your regular rods, try that whippersnapper, grab, I mean, there's a bunch of good colors. Grab one of the generic bait fish type colors, ghosty, just a nice color that's not super obnoxious, and just go try it. And then if you're catching fish, then you can jump in, right? Then you can start buying some high dollar baits and you understand what they're for. I've explained the differences between them for you, and you'll get what you pay for. But at first, I mean, even I say get what you pay for, but this is a really good bait. I'm very, very impressed with this guy. And he's also tiny. Like, look at it compared to a 110 Junior. I mean, it is a little bait. Okay, so if you're on tiny bait fish, it's a killer option. And then there is a bigger size too, but again, bang for the buck, killer option. Early fall, by far my favorite option. And then when we start getting into winter, I mean, it just can't be touched. The vision is amazing. And then also when I'm up north, when I'm smallmouth fishing, there's just something special about the vision that just gets them all the time. That is my bait when I'm up there, just across the board. Now, let's delve into color a little bit, all right? I don't want to go too deep. I don't want to spin you guys out. You've already hung in there really well. But when it comes to color, here's my rule of thumb. I start out natural. Okay, you'll see a lot of these baits I pick up are really natural tones. Some are matte finished, some have flash to them, but they're all pretty natural tones. They look a lot like a bait fish. That's always where I will start. But from there, I branch out. So if I know I'm around a lot of bait fish, I'm all about chrome. I want that flash, I want reaction. If I'm in murkier water, if I'm around smallmouth or spotted bass, or if I'm around largemouth that just seem to be reacting well, then I go to bold colors. And by bold, we're either talking brights like whites, white, bone, or some of my favorites, chartreuse, bright purple, bright chartreuse. You start talking about throwing clown type colors. I'm digging for some of these really cool ones. This is gonna be a disaster. But that guy right there, elegy bone, one of my absolute favorites. This one right here, another just absolute favorite of mine. But I would also put the baits that are white into that same aggressive category. Okay, it's not necessarily hot pink or bright orange or chartreuse. White is a very standout, very bold color that can play in that same category. Now, this brings me to something that I almost missed, and I really want to hammer for you because I always get asked this question. Do you need clear water to throw a jerkbait? Absolutely not. Now, fish will come much farther to get a jerkbait in clear water. When the water gets really, really cold in wintertime, clear water makes a big difference. Because the longer the bait has to sit, the reason you're letting a bait sit so long is because the fish are lethargic and you're giving them time to rise to the bait. Okay, so say the bass is on the bottom in 10 foot and I bring a jerkbait down to 6. If I'm fishing it quickly, she'll run right up and eat it if the water's warm. But if she's in 10, I'm in 6, the water's cold, and I work that bait, that fish is looking up, trying to see what's going on, and my bait has passed. It's just not moving as quickly. But if I jerk that thing and I let it sit, that fish will start to rise, Now it's close enough. It's in their wheelhouse. You're in the strike zone. Next twitch, pow, they're on it. We have so much underwater footage of that, where those fish are slow rising to that bait. They're already triggered. They're already into it. But that next movement, boom, it's go time. So that plays out the best in clearer water. Now, the warmer the water, the faster you're moving, the visibility is almost a moot point. I have caught so many fish on Clear Lake. You know, we used to live on Clear Lake, and Clear Lake is such a misnomer. Most of the year, that place is pretty murky. And part of the year, it's chocolate milk. Absolute chocolate milk. No viz to maybe 4 inches of viz. They will crush a white jerkbait in that. They'll crush clown. They'll crush anything with chartreuse on it. They don't care. That bait, I don't even know how they find it, but they find it. It's a combination of color and sound. That is how they find it. They're tracking the sound. But they can find it in next to no visibility at all. But again, if they were deeper and I had to fish slowly, they're just not as likely to rise in murkier water. So don't be afraid to throw a jerkbait. You can catch them even in muddy water. Make sure you're going bold, but know that as the water gets really, really cold, that bite might start to fade out on you more than a guy who's in a clear water fishery. Hopefully that helps. The actual act of fishing a jerkbait, not complicated. The gear itself is extremely technical, but your part of it's not. Your part of it is just buying the stuff that's right. A 610 medium makes a huge difference. That shorter rod will keep you from slapping the water with your rod tip all the time and spooking fish. And then it's just got that perfect action. Now, one thing, straight fluoro, that's my main deal. New fluoro makes a world of difference. This fluoro is actually old. It's been on this spool for far too long. See, when I just pulled it and stopped, look what just happened. You see the curls in the line? Okay, when that happens, again, the key to a jerkbait is that you rip, and stop. You never, when you go to move it again, if you reel up all your slack and you come tight on that bait and that bait swims at all, those fish bail off. It has to go from hard movement to dead stop to hard movement. If there's any movement forward, they're not into it. So with that in mind, you rip that thing and then it wants to curl. It will literally pull the bait forward to create the curl back in the line. It has memory. It will draw the bait forward in the water. You're doing everything right and it will still get messed up. So you either need to stretch your fluoro, and again, this applies more as the water cools and you're sitting there longer because it takes time for that to happen. If you're just aggressive in the springtime or early fall and you're really working that bait, it'll never come into play. But I'm talking about when you're dialing your equipment in, the water temps have dropped, your fish have slowed down, it's the heart of winter. Pay attention to the details. You either need to hook your bait to something and stretch that line a little bit before you go out to get those kinks out of it, get it straightened back up, or spool up fresh fluoro. It will make all the difference in the world when you're slow fishing a jerkbait. Again, this is one of those rabbit holes where you can stand outside the rabbit hole and look down there and you'll catch fish, right? You can buy a whippersnapper, throw it on one of your other rods, and you will catch fish. I mean, it's going to work. But you can also get really technical. You can dial in your gear, pay close attention to your line, don't worry about buying a gram scale. We already did it for you. But worry about the hooks you're putting on your baits. Keep your baits balanced. Make them suspend. And now all of a sudden you've got a bait that will catch fish, it will draw a core reaction, and it will do it for months on end. During a time of year where there's only a couple of things you can do to catch reaction fish. You can do this, you can speed crank, you can hop a blade bait. That's about it. outside of that, in wintertime, you're slow fishing. This is way more fun than slow fishing. So dial it in and go all in with it, and you will have a blast. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully you found it helpful. Hopefully it wasn't too much and too confusing for you. This is just one of those categories. I mean, I always joke that I have a lot of favorites, right? But this is a true favorite of mine. I mean, I will choose a jerkbait and force feed it when I could catch more fish on something else, just because I enjoy doing it so much. It's a great way to catch them. Something about you being on a slack line and a fish just jarring that rod is just incredible. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.